Free Motion Frenzy. In this class today, we're going to be featuring some free motion techniques. The first one we're going to work on is stippling, and then we're going to move on to some loops and swirls, and we're going to spend some time doing some feathers. I'm going to teach you a couple different techniques to perfect your feathers, and then last we're going to be doing some stencil work. A little bit about myself. My name is Sherry Miller, and I'm an educator for Juki America. I've been in the quilting and sewing industry for over 30 years, and I've been teaching quilting classes and writing patterns for the last 20 years. I'm very happy and honored to be here today to share my love of quilting with you. Let's see, we're going to start today's class by telling you a little bit about 3 of the machines we're going to feature in this class. And to do that, I have a quick little PowerPoint for you. So let me pull that up. The Juki Corporation is a Japanese manufacturer of industrial sewing machines and most recently, domestic machines. Juki machines are known for their industrial strength motors and their precision stitches. All of your clothing, furniture, car upholstery, and home deck were all sewn on Juki machines. Juki has brought those great strengths into the home market, making a Juki domestic machine the best quality machine available to you as a consumer. The first machine we're going to talk about today is the TL18 QVP. This machine sews up to 1,500 stitches per minute. It has an extra wide sewing bed that is 6 inches by 13 inches. It also comes with an auxiliary sewing table, 13 inches by 23 inches, has an automatic needle threader. You can lift your presser foot by the lever on the back of the machine, or it does come with a knee lifter, making it very convenient. All your quilting accessories are included in this machine, and it does have an easy feed dog drop lever that's located in the front of the machine. Some of the really cool features that I like to point out of this machine is it does have an adjustable speed regulator. So you can set that speed as fast or slow as you feel comfortable sewing, step on the gas, and your machine will never go past that speed. It also features a micro lifter. This feature is great if you're sewing fabrics with nap, heavier fabrics, different types of fabric together, as far as maybe having flannel on the back of a quilt and having cotton on the front. And it also accommodates for different weights of batting. And how this micro lifter works is it actually raises the foot off of your fabric just a minute amount and floats over your fabric. And that way, when you're sewing, it compensates for that thickness, but you're not losing the integrity of the stitch. It doesn't change your tension. All of that stays the same for you. So that's a great feature. You can also get an optional quilting table for this machine. And what this does is it slides on the arm of your machine. It's a 24 by 24 inch base, and it makes your machine more like a long arm. So it's a really neat feature. Moving on, we are next going to discuss the J350. And this machine is a sit-down long arm that can also be converted into a stand-up quilting frame. I love this machine because it's very easy to use, and it's the only long arm on the market that has a direct drive motor. And what this is going to mean to you is that there are not any belts inside the machine, so it makes it very reliable and maintenance-free. Some of the more prominent features on this machine is it will sew up to 2,200 stitches per minute. Again, it's got that extra large quilting bed. The sewing table is included, and you can see up on this PowerPoint up on the top, this table that's included, and then you can get 2 extension arms for it to make that sewing table even larger to support those bigger quilts. It does have the extra large M-style bobbin, so you're not going to have to fill up your bobbin as much. The foot that comes with it, the presser foot that comes with it, is also used as a ruler foot, so you're getting 2 values for 1. It does have an automatic thread cutter. It is the only machine long arm machine on the market right now that has a thread cutter built into it. So when you touch that button, it's going to bring the threads to the back and cut them. And that thread cutter is either available on the touch screen or in your presser foot. So you have two easy ways to access that. Some of the features that I like to highlight on this machine is up here in the top left corner. The LED lighting is a constant lighting right directly on your sewing area, and it's always on, so you get that great lighting. You have the auxiliary hand wheel located on the side of the machine. So if you ever get to in a bind where you have to turn your flywheel and get your needle out of your fabric, instead of getting up, walking to the back of your machine, it's located right on the side of the machine. It's a quick access. This machine also has a built-in bobbin winder. It's located on the top of the machine. So as you're sewing, you can wind bobbins, or if you run out of bobbins, you don't have to go find your bobbin winder. You can just pop your bobbin on there and wind your thread that way, so you're not having to look for an extra piece. It does have that large LCD touchscreen that's located in front of the machine, and you have all your sewing options on there. You can do your speed, you can do your stitches per minute, your needle up, needle down. Again, you can access your thread cutter. And you do have 3 features, sewing mode features on this machine. The first one and most common one is your manual. So however fast, however hard you step on the gas pedal, that's how fast your machine's going to go, and that's the manual mode. You do have a cruise mode, and what that's going to do is your stitch regulator is going to kick in, and however fast you move your fabric, that's how fast the machine's going to sew, and it is a continuous running speed. So whenever you stop moving your fabric, you do have to make sure you hit stop. And then you do have the precise mode, and what that does is it works just like your stitch regulation mode, except when you stop moving your fabric, your needle will actually stop. And I love that feature for ruler quilting. So since I've talked a little bit about the stitch regulator, let's look at the stitch regulator that's built in the machine, and that is the picture here on the left or on the right hand side of your screen. And the stitch regulator is an optical stitch regulation. And how that works is you can see right here, you have these white rectangles built into the machine, and those have lasers that are going to read how fast or how slow you move your fabric. That I'm going to feature today is the NX7, and that's going to be the machine we're going to be using for the class. And this machine is a high-performance quilting and sewing machine, and it comes with many quilting accessories and sewing accessories, and has customizable features that you can use in your sewing to make it much easier. Some of the best features in this machine is the straight stitch needle plate and straight stitch feed dogs, and this is my favorite feature of the machine. And you can see in my pictures up here, you just pop the plate off and you pop the feed dogs out, put the straight stitch feed dogs in and the straight stitch needle plate on, and you're ready to go. I love this feature whenever I do free motion quilting or stitch in the ditch quilting. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about this when we get ready for our project. I'll show you how that works. It also comes with a transparent free motion foot that doubles as a ruler foot. You can kind of see that in the picture here, but again, you're getting 2 feet in one, so it adds your value to the machine. And again, that's the foot we're going to be using in class today, so I'll show you a little bit more about that. One of my most favorite features of this machine is the programmable foot control. So you have the big pedal here on the right, and that's going to be your gas for the machine. And then off to the left here, you see this smaller pedal, and that pedal is programmable. And you can program it to, when you stop, have it raise your needle up automatically or keep it down. It will also, you can program it to do a locking stitch. You can program it to do 3 stitches forward, 3 stitches backwards. And my favorite one that I use and keep it on all the time is I actually use mine as a thread cutter. So what that does, when you get to the end of your seam, you step on this little part on the right here, brings the thread to the back and cuts them. And you can change that on and off depending on the different projects that you're doing. So for quilting, you might want to have it for one setting, and then for garment sewing, you might want to have it for another setting. Once you get used to using that feature, you'll love it. And then we have the Smart Feed system. And what the Smart Feed system does is it acts as a dual feed system. So it's always on your machine, and you can use it with most of your feet that come with the machine. And what that does, you can kind of see here in the picture, it swings down and slides into the back of your presser foot to engage it, and then you just sew. There's no special settings you have to do on your machine. Once you engage that, it just goes perfectly. So you can use it with your straight stitch foot or your straight stitch foot and plate, or you can use it with your multifunction plate to do forward propelled decorative stitches. One of my favorite functions that I like to use it for is I do a lot of paper piecing. And so when I have my straight stitch foot on there, I engage it, and that way my paper doesn't switch around. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and move on to our project. So the supplies we're going to be using in this class today, you're going to need 2 fat quarters. And I like to use a lighter color when I'm doing practice with very little pattern on it, and that way I can see what I'm stitching. And you're going to want to make sure that you have a fat quarter of batting. Any batting will work. The one that I'm using today is an 80-20 blend, and it just happens to be what I have to use, so that's what I'm going to be using. And then you're going to want some kind of temporary quilt basting spray. And this is available at your local store. And you just want to make sure it's water soluble. And you want to go ahead and make sure you're using a new needle. Anytime you start a quilting project, you want a new needle. And I like the organ needles. These are high performance needles. Remember, your Juki machine is a high performance machine, so it's going to work best with high performance needles. And I prefer the 90-14s for quilting. Again, that's just a preference. You are going to want to use a good quality thread. This is 100% cotton thread, 50 weight, 3-ply. King Tut, again, just whatever thread you prefer to quilt with will work. This just is my favorite. You're going to want some marking tools. I have a couple different ones here, and we're going to be using them throughout class, so find your favorite marking tool. And you're going to want to go ahead and, of course, have your quilting foot. Again, this is the clear foot that doubles as the ruler foot, so we're going to be putting that on our machine. And you are going to want a stencil of some kind. This is just a multi-purpose stencil. It's got a lot of different designs on there. So get your quilting stencil that is your favorite. A couple optional things that you may want are some quilting gloves. You can tell I use my quilting gloves a lot. They're well used. So just some quilting gloves that have grippers on them. Mine are on the fingertips. Lots of gloves are made a little bit different where you can grippers all the way down. So whatever you like. And then these are quilt grippers as well. And they just have gripping on the soles. So when you hold them, it's easier to manipulate your fabric. And I'll go ahead and show you how I used both of these in class today. And one other thing that might make things a little bit easy for you is an open toe foot. I like to use the open toe foot when I am going around a design. So this works great if you don't have a transparent foot. An open toe foot works really well. We're going to go ahead and get ready to prepare our fabric for class. So let me just move these out of the way for us. All right, so we're going to go ahead and start with spray basting our fabric. So we're going to take our backing fabric, and we're going to open it up, and you're going to put right side down, and you want to just pat it out and make sure you don't have any wrinkles in it. And then we're going to take our batting, and we're going to put it right over the top of our backing fabric. And again, we're going to pat it down to make sure that we don't have any wrinkles in that. When we get ready to use our spray based, you want to make sure you're spraying the batting and not the fabric. Sometimes what happens is you get a big glump of glue, and then you'll have a hard spot when you're trying to quilt, and that can cause some problems when you're quilting. And I got a little bit of hair in there, so get that out of the way. So you want to make sure you're spraying your batting. Go ahead and shake that really well. And it doesn't take much. Just apply a light layer and then fold that back, and you're going to pat it down. And then go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. Just a light layer and pat that down. And then you're going to go ahead and you're going to spray the whole surface of your batting. Again, just a light layer. And you're going to put your quilt top on that, and you're going to pat it down. We don't want to stretch our fabric out. The other thing I want to point out, when you are using your spray basting, I'm doing it on top of my mat. Make sure, again, you're using that water soluble so you can wipe your mat down, or just take your mat off and do it on a solid surface. That way you don't have to worry about the glue getting in your mat. And then we're going to go ahead and mark our quilt top, and I'm going to separate this into 4 sections so we can do a technique in each section. And the marking pen I'm using is a Clover chalk marking pen. Again, just find your favorite one that you like to use. And I'm not measuring, I'm just separating into 4 sections just for practice. And I don't want those chalk lines to disappear, so I'm just going over it twice. So let me just show you here. So our 4 sections include stipple, loops and swirls, feathers, and stencils. And at this point, we're ready to go ahead and move on over to the sewing machine to start our project. So we moved over to our machine, and I'm going to show you how to get it set up for free motion. So right now I have on our multi-purpose plate and our basic feed dogs, and I'm going to go ahead and show you how to change those out. We're going to just go ahead and pop up our plate, and it's that easy. And you just want to take the front of your feed dogs and lift them up gently, and your feed dogs pop out. We're going to go ahead and put our straight stitch feed dogs on, and I just want to show you the difference between the feed dogs. With our regular multi-purpose feed dogs, we have 5 contact points. With our straight stitch feed dogs, we only have 3 contact points. So that's going to give us a more precise and straight line. So to put those in, you're just going to grab them by the front, and you're just going to slide them in the slot and push them down. And it's just that easy. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to take our straight stitch plate, and we're going to slide it in and pop it down. And you're ready to go with straight stitching. And since we're here, let's go ahead and put our foot on. So I'm just going to go ahead and slide it on. And I always just do a little snug tightening, so it's on my machine, and with the vibration, I don't have to worry about it sliding off. So let's get that on there. Takes just a minute to get it screwed on. That screw was out farther than I thought. Sorry about that. Just one more little snug turn here and we'll be set. All right, there we go. So when I use that microtech lifter technology there, now you can see my presser foot is lowered, but I can now freely move my fabric underneath my presser foot. And that is that hover function. It's not changing the integrity of our stitch or change the tension at all. It just minutely lifts that foot up. So now we can move our fabric underneath our foot freely, which makes it great for free motion quilting. So we're gonna go ahead and start with our first technique. And you can see here, we're gonna start with stippling. Get that under there for you. We're gonna start with some stippling designs. And if you're new to free motion quilting, this is the easiest technique to start with. There is no rhyme or reason to it. It is truly just a free-for-all. So we're gonna start by pulling up our thread, and I'm gonna go ahead and get my gloves on. They give me more grip when I am free motion quilting. You'll notice on these gloves, these are my favorite gloves. They're machiniger gloves. And I have cut the fingertips off so that way I can manipulate my thread easier. There are some brands out there that they already have them off, or you might like them fully intact. It's just up to you. So this is what I've chosen to do. Go ahead and grab that top thread, hit your needle up, needle down twice, and that's going to bring our bobbin thread up. And then one of my favorite sewing tools, all-purpose sewing tools, are my tweezers. So I can go ahead and pull that little thread up from the bobbin. So we're going to just start here in the corner, and I'm going to lower my presser foot. And I'm just going to go ahead and step on the gas. And I'm just going to show you my technique, and then I'll explain it to you as we go. And I know this thread drives some people crazy. I learned how to, when I learned how to free motion quilt, I had all my threads on top of the presser foot. However you learn is fine. There is no right or wrong. That's just the way I choose to do it. So let's go ahead and continue on. I pulled those threads away so they're out of the way. Step on the gas. And you can see I'm just gently moving my fabric forward, backward, right and left. And I like to point that out because I'm not twisting my fabric. When I twist my fabric to get to where I want to be, I call that driving my fabric. And you can see how ugly and uneven and jagged my stitches and my design is. So you want to go ahead and keep your hands in a hoop-like shape around where you're sewing, and you want to move your fabric right, back, left, forward. So forward, backward, right, left. We don't ever want to drive our fabric around in a circle. The other thing is we want to move our fabric at the same speed that our machine is moving. So let me go ahead and stop and readjust my hands here. You can see I have my machine set to always stop with my needle down, and that is going to be one of your best friends when you're free motion quilting, is to have that needle stop down. So that way when I reposition my hands, I'm not losing my spot where I stopped. Let's go ahead and start again. So the faster I go, the faster I want to move my fabric. The slower I go, the slower I want to move my fabric. And I'm just drawing lines. If you have a hard time keeping your speed of your fabric, this is where your speed regulation comes into play. And I'm just going to tip my camera up just a little bit so you can see the front of my machine. So you can see on the front of my machine, I have, let me get that up there. I want to stay here. Okay, I think you can see that now. Okay, so on the front of my machine, I have a speed control here, rabbit turtle. So I can move that speed control and I can unplug my foot control. And when I unplug my foot control, I now have this arrow here that I can work. And when I touch that, it's going to run my machine at a constant speed. So now I don't have to touch my foot control. and I get the same speed constantly. I like to sew a little faster, so we're going to go ahead and speed that up. But you can see it's a very constant speed. So if you're having a hard time controlling your speed, go ahead and engage that function on your machine. And you're just going to practice just getting nice, even stitches. And by even, again, that means the control of your machine. And when you're ready to stop, you're just going to touch that button there and it's going to stop. Again, my needle's down. One thing I'd like to show you, I'm going to cut my threads here. Oh, let me put my camera back down so you can see what I'm doing. All right, I think that's good. All right, so one thing I'd like to show you is when I just sat down at this machine and started and was kind of doing my technique, look at the back of my fabric. The back of my fabric, my bobbin stitches look just as good as my top stitches. So you're not having to mess with your tensions at all when you're doing this. And if you're free motion quilting and you see your top thread come to the back where they're pulling a little bit, we call them eyelashes in the quilting world. If you see that, it's not a tension issue, it is a speed issue. And what that usually means is that you are moving the fabric faster than the machine is going. And I'm going to go ahead and plug my machine back in. All right, so we can go ahead and just continue on practicing. I'm going to go ahead and pull my top thread out a little bit. And I'm going to, again, use my needle up, needle down to pull my bobbin thread. And you can pull that, and if you can get used to it, go ahead and pull your bobbin thread out, and now your threads are underneath. So again, however you want to start and stop your stitches is fine, but just be consistent, but it really is how you learn. So to start, we're going to stitch in place just a couple times. That's going to lock our thread, and we're going to continue on practicing. There's lots of different stippling that you can do. This is the most traditional stippling. It's just kind of a meander with curves. You can do it very small. It's called micro stippling. Very, very small. It takes a lot of practice and a lot of patience, but you see this a lot around appliques. So same technique. And then again, we can move into those bigger stipples. And then one of my favorite stippling techniques are flames. And literally you're just going to come down, do a little curve, make a point. You can go ahead and stop, and then come back up. And you can follow the curve, or you can do your own thing. Get to the top, back down. And you can make these as big or small as you want, again, as wide as you want. But this is a really neat way to get some texture in your quilt that isn't your traditional stipple. So that's also considered a stipple. Maybe some water. Let me get to a different place here. Get my hand situated. All right, always keep that little hoop area going, and that's where you want to stitch in. Water is kind of a nice feature. And so that's just kind of elongated stipples. My stitches, I can kind of see they're getting a little big here, a little long. I like mine a little closer together. So that means I need to speed up my machine a little bit. I like to sew just at a little faster pace here. So now you can see my stitches have shortened a little bit. So this is just water, so just back and forth, whatever you want to call it. And then maybe you get bored doing those, so you want to maybe do some straight lines. Some people call these pipes. whatever you feel comfortable with. These are all forms of stipple. And you notice no matter what shape or design I'm doing, I have that forward, backward, right, left motion. I don't have where I'm driving my fabric. I'm getting a little far here, so go ahead and stop, reposition your hands. Got my hoop area going here. So pretty much any design that you can do and think of, you can sew. You do want to make sure that you have a fluid motion going on. You don't want to be starting and stopping a lot. Anytime you are ready to stop, just go ahead and sew in place a couple times. That'll knot it. Cut your thread, brings it to the back. All right, so let's go ahead and just take a look at the back of my quilt sandwich again. Again, this is where I used my thread cutter, so it brings the threads to the back and cuts them. So you can see it does leave a nice tail, and you can just go ahead and cut that since we've knotted it there. But look at how nice the back of my stitches look. They look just as good as the front. So you're not having to change any of your tension settings when you do free motion quilting. Let's go ahead and move on to loops and swirls, and they are going to be the same type of movement as far as forward, backward, right, left. All right, so we're going to go ahead and start with our loops and swirls, and we have our tail of our thread, so we're going to go ahead and pull that off to the side. We're going to always start the same way: needle up, needle down, pull that bobbin thread up, grab your tweezers. Let's see. Grab them from underneath this time. All right, hold those two threads in place. And again, stitch in place. You always want to stitch in place a couple times. That's going to knot it for you. And when we get ready to start with our swirls, again, it's the exact same movement. So watch how we do this. And we're going to stop and get that thread out of the way. All right. So you're just going ahead and doing loops in your brain, and they're transferring to your fabric. Again, I'm getting kind of close to my finger. So we're going to stop. I try not to stop on a curve. Sometimes that's kind of hard to start. Always try to stop at the end of a loop if you can. Sometimes it's unavoidable, but so let's just continue to practice, and then we can do bigger loops. You just kind of want to play with your designs. Again, moving the fabric forward, backward, right, left, not driving the fabric. If we start trying to drive the fabric, I can't even do it. It's so embedded in my brain here. But if you try to start driving the fabric, see how crazy our loops get. You have no control. So keep that fabric in the same direction. The other thing I want you to consider is when you are doing free motion on a bigger quilt, you have your bulk of your quilt under your arm on this side, and you can't manipulate and turn your quilt. So that is a good reason when you're practicing not to manipulate your quilt as much as possible, because when you have a bigger quilt in that machine, you're not going to be able to manipulate it at all. So keep that in mind too. All right, so we're just gonna go ahead and continue on with our swirls. You can do, or I'm sorry, with our loops, we can do big loops, little loops. The more different sizes you do, that wasn't quite the correct way to say that, but the more sizes you do, the more texture you're gonna have to your quilt. So try to get used to sewing or quilting different size loops in a different direction. ahead and stop here. So once you're feeling pretty confident with doing some loops, what we can move into are swirls. So when we get ready to do our swirls, again, we have our hoop here, and we can go ahead and do a big circle, and then you're gonna just come in. Just remember what a lollipop looks like, those old-fashioned lollipops. That's the design we want. And you'll notice I took off my gloves. Sometimes when I'm doing swirls, I like to actually use my grippers to do those. So let me show you how those work. So I'm just gonna put the padded part on my fabric, again, kind of keeping that hoop shape. And I don't have death grip on my paddles, I just have them to guide. So let's just go ahead and try it again. And the reason I like my paddles is I just feel like I have a little bit more control over my fabric, and it's I can move it a little bit more freely and have more room to do those swirls. And you can hear I'm speeding up my machine just a little bit. Go ahead and do this swirl. And maybe I want to add a little bit more depth to this swirl. So what I'm going to do is kind of make it a little bit more three-dimensional. And I'm going to go back over where I've already sewn. So you can make your swirls anything you want, but just kind of keep that lollipop design in your head, and that's where you're going to go with that. Again, we can add maybe a little bit of stippling in here to add some interest or get to where we might want to put our next swirl. So make sure that when you're doing this, you're combining your stitches and kind of thinking about where your next swirl wants to be, because your fabric will speak to you and tell you where you want it or where it wants it. And I really like the overlapping effect. That's just my preference. And sometimes our swirls want to be pretty, so we can actually add some petals to our swirl if we want. And again, it's just kind of another free motion technique. Whatever you feel like drawing, you're drawing on your fabric. All right, so those are kind of the basics of our circles and swirls. Another one that, since we have a little bit more space up here, I'll show you another little technique that I like to do, especially if I'm trying to fill up space. Do a teardrop. And you can do another teardrop inside. And you can do as many as you want. And then come out, and you can do these close together, you can do them far apart. They're just another technique to practice with. And then we're going to come out, maybe do another one up here. And you just want it to kind of look like a teardrop. You can make them as curvy as you want. So maybe you want them to look more like paisleys. Wrap around this one. And maybe that one I don't want to fill in, so let's do another one up here. So maybe you don't want to fill them in as much, or you want them to look more like leaves. But just kind of play with it and see what you come up with. And then maybe we're tired of doing those, so we want to do stippling. So you can actually do a whole quilt by combining different elements of loops and swirls and stippling. And then when we get ready to stop, we're just going to sew in place a couple times. That's going to knot it, get our thread cutter, brings our threads to the back and cuts them. Again, let's go ahead and look at the back of our fabric here. And again, no pulling. So that's one of the great things about using the Juki machine is you get consistent stitching throughout. If you're not getting consistent stitching on your samples or on your quilts, again, generally it's because you're moving the fabric too fast or too slow. If you're getting a lot of knots, that usually means you're moving the fabric too slow. If you're getting, again, those eyelashes, that pulling where you're seeing your top thread come through to the back, that usually indicates you're moving your fabric too fast. So those are kind of some of the troubleshooting points we're looking for. But just practice your loops and swirls. They're a lot of fun to do, very hypnotic. We're going to go ahead and move on to feathers here, and this is the part that everybody loves to learn. And you can see in my sample here, let me put my foot up. You can see in my sample here, I have a couple different techniques I'm going to show you. So this is just kind of the beginner stage of my feathers, and then a more uniform, and then the more whimsical one. So let me show you how we're going to do those. And I like to start by practicing on a pad of paper. So I'm just going to move my fabric off to the back of my machine, and I'm going to put my pad of paper under here. And this is just a cheap pad of paper that I bought in the kids section at a store. And it was very inexpensive, so just newsprint. So to start, when we start doing feathers, it's easiest to start at the bottom and work your way up. And you want a teardrop shape. You don't want a half heart shape. You want a teardrop shape. And we're going to go ahead and you come back to where you started, and then go ahead and follow the last teardrop, make a new teardrop. And as we come up, and this, again, this is just the very basics. You want to just go ahead and do different sizes and just get that shape in your brain of that teardrop. And I always just do this a couple times just to get it in my brain how I want it to, how I want my teardrops to look. And the reason a lot of times when you're learning, we think of half heart shapes. Well, if you're doing a half heart shape, you can't get this nice consistent form here. You actually have to, and I can't do the half heart shape that way, but you're not getting a nice consistent shape all the time. It just doesn't flow, and the plumes don't come out far enough. So one thing I'd like to, going back to my drawing here, you have two shapes I want you to kind of think about when you're drawing. When you are making your teardrop shape, you actually want to have some kind of circle form at the end of each plume. And then as you're coming back to make your next plume, you want a V shape. And that's going to be consistent in any kind of feather that we're going to do. And you don't get that with the heart shape necessarily. So that's why it's easier to think of it as a teardrop. Another technique that I like to do, I call it the braided feather. And this one is a really easy one to do when you're trying to learn how to be uniform in your feathers. So instead of coming all the way down, we're actually going to touch our last plume, and you're going to follow that top plume. And we're going to come down and we're going to touch the top plume and then follow. Touch and follow. Touch, oops, break our lead there. Touch and follow. Okay. So you get more of a braided look here, but again, we have that circle going in on the top of our plume and we have that V on the bottom of our plume. So I recommend when you're learning, just take your pencil to paper and do it that way. And then once you kind of get that in your brain, let's go ahead and put it to our fabric here. And I'm going to turn our fabric over this way. All right. So again, we're going to start with our thread here, our top thread out. And I put my presser foot down and use your needle up, needle down, pull that bobbin thread up, grab your best friends, the tweezers. All right. Do your locking stitch. And then let's go for it. So we're going to go ahead and do that teardrop shape. Stop, get those threads out of the way. All right. That one didn't turn out so well, but that's okay. We're going to get it back together here. Do our V, come up. Do our V, come up, do our plume. So this is just going to give you something to follow and practice. This is more of a whimsical, like I said, kind of design. It's not real precise, but it does let you get the motion down. Again, not moving our fabric any direction, but forward, backward, right, left. Got our hands in the hoop position. I'll just go ahead and just quickly sew just a couple more for you. And then when we get ready to top it off, you always want to just do one plume at the top to finish it off. Stitch in place a couple times, cut our threads. I want to go ahead and point out that traditionally in a feather, you do have some sort of stem. Well, by doing that V in the same area, so to speak, you are getting the illusion of having a stem without actually drawing one. So in this practice, you're getting all the illusions of a feather, but not the preciseness. So if we want to get a little bit more precise, we'll do the braided, lift that up a little bit. We'll do the braided feather here. Needle up, needle down, pull that bobbin thread. I can pull it out from underneath here. I'm learning, the more I teach, the more I'm learning to put my threads on the bottom here. All right, so stitch in place a couple times. And we're gonna go ahead and do that teardrop shape. And then do the teardrop shape on the other side. And we're going to connect on the top of that teardrop. And then we want to follow the top of that plume, come around, touch, and follow on the top of that plume. And I am purposely doing my plumes different sizes and different shapes so you can see there is no right or wrong. But if you'd like to keep them a little bit more consistent, you can do that. Reposition my hands here. So I think it's very hypnotic to watch people do feathers. I love the way that they look, and I love the diversity they have. So I can watch people demonstrate feathers and just for hours. I just think it's very hypnotic and soothing. Now you can see I got off a little bit. I'm not going to worry about that in the scheme of things. Nobody's going to notice that. So don't be hard on yourself if you get off a little bit. We're just going to do one more. And then again, we always want to finish with something on the top. All right, stitch in place a couple times. Use your thread cutter, bring them to the back. So you can see it looks more like a braid, but again, we are getting more of that stem illusion going on without actually making a stem. Now, some of the most common feathers that we see do use a stem. And so we are going to start, let's see that yet. Okay, so we're going to start with a curved type shape. And we're going to use that as our stem. So this is more of our traditional type feather that we're going to use here. Or so here. Needle up, needle down, bring that thread up. Can teach an old dog new tricks apparently. Get that in the bottom. Hold on to it. Okay. And this time, because I'm using a stem, it's easier to sew one side of your feather at a time. And what I mean by that is we're going to go ahead and we're going to start by making, everything starts with a teardrop shape. And we're going to go ahead and follow the top of that plume. And we're going to just touch that line. Follow it up. And now you can see I'm just using one side. And maybe this one I want. Oops, I went up the wrong side. Sorry about that. Got so excited I went up the wrong side. All right. So we're just going to continue up here. These are your more traditional feathers that you're used to seeing. And now I'm going to come down. And now I'm going to trace my line that I drew. Oh, I ran out of bobbin thread. So let's go ahead and cut that. All right, so we're just going to continue to sew down here. And when we get to the end, then we'll go ahead and do our feathers on the other side and complete it, or you can leave it just as half of a feather, just depending on what you want to do. Bring our threads to the back and cut them. Now the last technique we're going to do today is the stencil technique, and I save this for last because a lot of people start with their stencil technique and they have the hardest time trying to follow a stencil because you haven't got the basics of free motion down as far as the way you manipulate your fabric. So let's go ahead and trace our stencil on our fabric, and you're just going to grab your favorite marking pencil. I am using a marking pencil so you can see what I'm tracing. And you want to trace your stencil exactly how you're going to sew it. So I know this is a little bit difficult to see because it's white on white, but we are going to trace our stencil exactly like we're going to see it. And I'm doing leaves. So I'm going to start at the end, and I'm just going to trace this around. And I'm going to come back and start on my next leaf. And the reason we want to trace it exactly as you've sewn it, so that way when you get ready to sew, you know where you're going and you're not guessing. Another thing, if you are new to stencils and have not used them, you can tell I'm lifting up my pencil and when I trace, and that's because there's solid pieces of the stencil in here, and that sole purpose for those solid pieces is just so that the stencil doesn't fall apart when they make it. It doesn't have anything to do with how we're going to sew it, because we want to sew in one continuous line. So I know it's kind of boring watching here, but I cannot emphasize enough, you want to trace your stencil exactly how you're going to sew it. So we'll do this pretty quickly here, this end one. And one thing when you're free motion quilting, I want you to think about is when you are drawing something, you generally don't turn your paper to draw or write. You keep it one direction. So when you're quilting, you want to keep that kind of same principle in mind. You don't want to turn your fabric. You want to keep it in one direction, just like you're writing. Okay, so you can see I've traced my stencil here, and you can see I have these spaces here. All that is for is so that the stencil stays together. We are going to sew those as one continuous line. So as always, we want to start by bringing our bobbin thread up, needle up, needle down. And I have a different color bobbin now, so that bobbin thread's a little bit harder to see, but we're going to start at the tip, sew in place a couple times, and then we're going to go for it with our stencil. So we're just going to trace our stencil just like we drew it, but now we're tracing it with thread. When you're tracing a stencil, you will notice my machine does speed up and slow down. I do speed up and slow down as I transition when I'm tracing stencils. And the more comfortable I get with it, the faster my machine will sew. But that is one time you need a little bit more precision and a little bit more control over your machine. So you will notice I do start and slow down and speed up. All right, I'm not getting directly on the line, but with the more you practice, the easier that'll become for you. And you want to make sure you're not breaking any threads, and what I mean by that is you're not doing any starting and stopping. You want to do it continuously. So when we first start out with stencils, we have a tendency to want to try to move our fabric where the stencil is, and you end up with not a very pretty stitch, and you end up with not a very consistent shape. That one I actually did pretty good on, but you can see it is a little bit more wobbly than the ones where I'm not driving my fabric. So it's always the same principle, forward, backward, right, left, no matter what you're free motion quilting. And you can see the more I do this, the easier it becomes. So it's just that muscle memory. And of course, if you ever want to add anything into your stencils, you can. Maybe instead here, we want to do a little swirl. So a stencil is more of a guide and not the end of all end, but it does give you a place to start. Get my little hoop going on with my fingers here. And because I want this one to match, I'm going to come around. When you end against, you're going to stitch in place a couple times. Bring your threads to the back and cut them. So that's kind of it for stencils. That's why we end there. That way you have the technique as far as how you want, how your movement of your fabric needs to be. So I hope you've enjoyed our class today. So does anybody have any questions about any of the techniques we've worked with today? We will continue to monitor and answer your questions, so please keep them coming. Make sure you're using the comment box. This concludes our class for today. I hope that you feel like you're now able to conquer free motion quilting. Please remember that the key to free motion quilting is lots and lots of practice. The more you practice, the easier it'll become. To find out more about our Juki products, please go to our website at Juki Home or Juki Quilting. There you'll also find a link to your local authorized Juki dealer.